Good morning. Early in the morning, after returning from my daily jog, an unfamiliar woman greeted me. In the morning sunlight, she stood smiling, a tall woman with long black hair and distinctive elongated yet round eyes, somewhat like a cat's, making her look like a model. "Excuse me." Surprised to be greeted by such a beauty so early in the morning, I looked around, wondering if she was really addressing me, and started acting a bit suspicious. Seeing this, she gave a slight laugh. "I'm Sandy Miller. I moved in next door yesterday. Sorry for the late introduction. Nice to meet you." Her high-pitched voice was as clear as a bell when she said this. Then she gave a slight bow in my direction. In that moment, a sweet and refreshing scent tickled my nose. It must be her perfume. "Oh, I'm Jake Smith. I teach part-time at that all-girls school you can see over there." Not knowing what else to say, I blurted out a brief introduction. Sandy looked in the direction I pointed. "Oh, the one with the church," she murmured. "I work at a Catholic all-girls high school, which, although small, has a wonderful stained glass church. You can slightly see its roof from this apartment." "You're a teacher. That's surprising. You don't look like one at all," she said with a mischievous grin. I could only scratch my head in response. I've always been told at school that I don't quite seem like a teacher, and people I meet for the first time apparently can't imagine me in that role. Maybe I lack a bit of authority, I said, half-jokingly. She narrowed her eyes playfully. "Please, call me Sandy, Mr. Teacher." Her voice was now much deeper than the high-pitched tone from earlier, which caught me off guard. Whether she realized the effect she had on me or not, Sandy waved, saying "see you later," and disappeared into her apartment. The whole exchange must have lasted just about 3 minutes. Yet, in that short time, Sandy left a strong impression on me. I had thought that all-girls schools would be lively, but when I first started at this school, I was surprised by its tranquility. Having transferred from a technical school, that might have made me feel even more so. The students are all modest and well-mannered, many of them giving off a somewhat sheltered vibe. And they always greet with "good day." I remember being flustered the first time I was greeted that way, not knowing how to respond. There are no troublemakers, and life at the school is peaceful, without much excitement. Today, as always, when the students pass me in the hallway, they stop and give a gentle bow, saying "good day." I simply reply with a yeah or a ha. That's the best I can muster. I also bump into nuns wearing scapulas among the students. There are older nuns as well as younger ones. Some nuns teach, while others participate only in charity activities. I've also heard that some are devoted to continuous prayers in the church. Either way, I spend most of my day in this surreal environment. "Good morning, Mr. Smith." The one who greeted me in the hallway was one of the nuns, Sister Susan. She's still young, and the students told me she chose the path of a nun right after high school graduation. Many students look up to her kind nature. At school, she's like a big sister to the students, listening to their concerns in the infirmary. "Sister Susan, you're working today." I know she's younger than me, but whenever I talk to her, I can't help but use formal language. "Hey, you're using formal language again. I'm much younger, so you don't have to be so polite," she said with a gentle laugh, making me scratch my head in embarrassment. Recently, have there been any serious concerns from the students? I've been wondering about that since summer break is just around the corner. As summer approaches, even the more reserved students seem to get a bit more excited. Maybe they're excited to break free from this otherworldly school for the summer break. "I wanted to discuss something with you, Mr. Smith." In the bustling hallway, Sister Susan whispered to me. We agreed to meet after school in the infirmary, and with that, we went our separate ways. After school, when I arrived at the infirmary, Sister Susan served me some tea. "Thank you. So, about that student. I took a sip of the tea and got straight to the point. I didn't want to take up too much of Sister Susan's time. I had intended to make this conversation brief. Well, it's actually about Catherine from Class A. Sister Susan began with that introduction. Catherine from Class A is a standout student in this school. It's not that she causes problems, but compared to other students who seem somewhat aloof, Catherine seems to have an abundance of energy and liveliness. From my perspective, she's just like any other high school girl out there. Catherine, is she going through some issues? I couldn't imagine the ever-cheerful Catherine having concerns serious enough for her to consult Sister Susan. It must be quite a dilemma, I thought. Actually, she's seeking advice about love. Blushing slightly, Sister Susan said with a hint of embarrassment. She added in a soft voice, I have no experience in that area. Relationship advice. Typical concern for a teenage high school girl. However, it seems to be a challenging topic for Sister Susan. Apparently, Catherine has been deeply infatuated, and if her love doesn't reciprocate, she seriously mentioned becoming a nun. Prayer isn't meant for that. I was taken aback and flinched when she suddenly raised her voice. Based on what I've heard from Catherine, I think it might be best to speak with her guardian. Hearing such words coming out of the usually sensible Sister Susan surprised me. Would that be in Catherine's best interest? Finding out something they didn't want their guardian to know can be distressing for a student. I tried to gently rein her in, but she seemed not to hear me. They live nearby, so I thought of just meeting them. I wanted you to accompany me. The conversation was already moving towards meeting Catherine's guardian, and I was getting anxious. She must be genuinely concerned about Catherine to be taking such actions. I racked my brain, trying to find a way to calm the situation without offending Sister Susan. Okay, I'll meet them first. I'll try to subtly ask about Catherine's situation. This was the only way to stop Sister Susan's impulsiveness. To calm the situation, I found myself making that promise without thinking. I can't believe I'm taking up so much of your time, Mr. Smith. No worries, let me handle it. I'll make sure to report to you about it tomorrow. Looking into Sister Susan's eyes, I tried to put on the most serious face I could muster. She stared right back with a steady gaze. I felt a twinge of guilt, feeling like I might be deceiving her, but it was for both Sister Susan and Catherine's sake. I silently said a little prayer in my heart, whispering I'm sorry. Though I had let it slip in the heat of the moment, having promised to report the matter to Sister Susan, I decided to go meet Catherine's guardian. If they weren't around when I visited, that would be just fine, and if they were, I thought I'd just have a little chat and then head on home. Coincidentally, Catherine hadn't yet submitted her college application. The deadline had passed 3 days ago. As Catherine's assistant teacher, I figured I'd be fine as long as I had a reason to visit. Without giving it much thought, I checked Catherine's guardian's address. When I saw the address, I couldn't believe my eyes. The previous address was crossed out with a double line, and a new one was freshly written. And, to my surprise, it was the apartment right next to mine. Turns out, my new neighbor is Catherine's guardian. Looking closer, it seemed the guardian's name had been recently changed. I recalled hearing that Catherine had grown up in a complicated household. I thought it might be all right to just introduce myself as her assistant teacher and say hello. I felt a bit more at ease. When I rang the doorbell of the apartment next door, I wasn't very nervous. The door clicked open, and Sandy peeked out. "Hi, it's Jake Smith from next door." I had planned what to say, but the moment I saw Sandy's face, I got nervous and forgot. I think I was obviously acting suspicious. I just had a little something to ask. My tone sounded like a police interrogation. I noticed Sandy looking at me with an amused expression. Seeing her reaction, I regained a bit of composure. "Sandy, "Are you Catherine's guardian by any chance?" As I stammered out the explanation, she nodded slowly. "My family's a bit complicated. All my siblings have different mothers. Of course, the mothers of Catherine's and mine are not the same, but neither of them wanted to have Catherine, so I became her guardian." Sandy said that in one breath and then looked at me with a challenging gaze. I could sense her determination, wanting to be taken seriously as a young guardian. It's not about the qualifications as a guardian, but Catherine hasn't submitted her college application form yet. I quickly blurted out the excuse I had prepared. Sandy then said, "Ah," and scratched her head, looking relieved. "I've told her she should go to any college she wants, but she seems hesitant." She seemed to know about the missing college application form. Then, adding, "We shouldn't be talking here," Sandy invited me inside. Her room was, well, quite sparse. She might be a minimalist. However, there were several piles of thick books. I had assumed she was a student, but apparently not. "Here you go." She handed me a glass of iced tea, which I gratefully accepted. I sat on a cushion, while she settled into a computer chair. "Any other issues regarding Catherine?" As I took a sip of my tea, Sandy spoke up. Caught off guard, I struggled to respond. "Visiting a guardian's home just for college guidance? I've never heard of that. Did something happen to Catherine?" As she stared intently at me, I felt like a deer caught in headlights. There was no hiding anything. I gave up and decided to be honest with Sandy about what I had heard from Sister Susan. Of course, I emphasized that I wanted it kept a secret from Catherine. Sandy listened quietly, only nodding occasionally to encourage me to continue. She had a certain presence and authority about her, making it hard to tell who was the older one here. According to Sister Susan, Catherine expressed her intention to live with a certain young man right after graduation. She wanted to start living together as soon as they left home, but with college on the horizon, that seemed challenging. Why? Because that young man is a junior in high school, a year younger than Catherine. Catherine told Sister Susan that she was prepared to support him financially. Really? Catherine said that. After hearing the entire story, Sandy paused, eyes cast downward in deep thought. It seemed like she knew the guy Catherine had feelings for and looked troubled by the situation. "I truly wish for my students to follow their own paths in life, but right now, she seems like a ticking time bomb. I wouldn't be surprised if she ran away from home." I honestly expressed what I had felt when I talked to Sister Susan. I couldn't tell Sister Susan, as it might have caused an uproar, but I do believe this situation carries that kind of risk. "Thank you for discussing this with me. I'm grateful to have gotten to know a bit about Catherine's feelings. Could you leave this matter to me for now?" Sandy stood up from her computer chair, deeply bowing her head towards me. A gentle scent of shampoo filled the air. "Of course, you're Catherine's guardian after all, but if there's anything I can help with, please don't hesitate to ask." I quickly said, "Please, lift your head," upon which Sandy looked up with a playful grin. She seemed to have so many expressions. The face she had when we met this morning was like a different person's, and her current smile resembled that of a young girl receiving praise. I wonder how many sides there are to her. My interest in Sandy grew stronger. A week had passed since I discussed Catherine's case with Sandy. I told Sister Susan that I had already spoken with Catherine's guardian and asked her to keep an eye on the situation. As for Catherine herself, she hasn't handed in her college application yet. Her homeroom teacher, aware of her complicated family situation, is willing to wait a bit past the deadline. When I got back to my apartment after work, I noticed the window of Sandy's room next door was slightly open. Did she forget to close it, or was she letting in some air because it was hot? Seems a bit careless, I thought. I should subtly remind her the next time we meet. As I was thinking this, a gust of wind briefly lifted her curtains. For a split second, I could see inside. In the dimly lit room of the early evening, I could see Sandy trying to change into a t-shirt. A faint silhouette of her pale back stood out against the dim backdrop. I knew I shouldn't watch, but the contrast between the shadows and her skin was mesmerizing. As she twisted slightly, I saw a dark scar, like that of a severe burn, stretching from her side to below her chest. A keloid that extends from the side of the abdomen to just below the chest. It's the scar of a major burn. Given its size, it must have been a life-threatening injury. I gasped and stepped back from the scene. I shouldn't have looked. I saw her secret. I quickly tried to open my door. In my haste, I fumbled with the key, making a clattering noise. Just as I managed to open the door of the room next to mine clicked open. "Jake, do you have a moment?" Sandy peeked her head through the open door. Remembering what I had just seen, I felt my face flush and I was at a loss for how to hide my shock. Seeing my awkwardness, she tilted her head with a puzzled look. "If you're busy, maybe some other time." As Sandy started to close the door, I hurriedly stopped her. Just like the other day, I went into her room and sat on a cushion on the floor. I noticed a few more items in her room than before, which made me a bit uneasy. There were more feminine items. A pink makeup bag and cute socks. While these could belong to Sandy, they somehow didn't seem to fit her. "It's about Catherine. I heard she hasn't submitted her college application yet." Sandy sat on her computer chair, looking out the window as she began to speak. Whenever she talked about something important, she had a habit of looking away. "That's right. She hasn't submitted her application yet," I answered honestly, as there was no need to hide anything. After hearing my response, Sandy sighed softly and said, "I see. In fact, Catherine approached me saying she wants to work right after graduating high school." Sandy sighed again. Apparently, Catherine tearfully confided in Sandy, her guardian, about her desire to stand on her own 2 feet as soon as possible. She was crying, but I think it was because she felt helpless about having to give up on her dreams. It wasn't like she was crying just to get sympathy. Sandy emphasized that. I remembered Catherine talking about wanting to be a lawyer in the future when she was a freshman. She took law courses, wanting to help kids in trouble. Remembering that, I got a faint idea of what the issue might be. "It's about the boy Catherine's seeing. I think it's probably my brother, Jason. Catherine wants to move out and live with Jason. That's her wish." Sandy made a slightly troubled face, then chuckled. She seemed to be recalling something, her smile tinged with a hint of sadness. Then, prefacing with "this is just between us," she started to talk about her family. "It seems there are 7 siblings in total, all with different mothers. Including Sandy, only 3 of them are adults. The remaining 4 are still students. Sandy never lived with her father. She lived with her mother. In other words, she seems to be a child born out of wedlock. Catherine had a similar situation, but she was taken in by her father, while her younger brother was raised by Sandy's mother. It's said that Sandy and Catherine's brother grew up like true siblings. What only Catherine was taken in by him, I won't know unless I ask that man. The fact is, Catherine and Jason are blood-related siblings, yet they grew up apart. Recently, Catherine, who learned that Jason was a real brother, lashed out at their father for not taking him in. The father apparently snapped back, saying, "After all I did for you." He then cut off all financial support. Hearing this, Sandy, acting as the new guardian, started looking after Catherine's living expenses. "My mother was a bit fragile mentally, and she did some things she regrets to Jason. She probably broke down waiting for that man who never came around." One day, with a kettle full of boiling water in her hands, Sandy's mother approached the 2 of them. A harrowing incident took place. Protecting her brother, Sandy suffered severe burns. How could she? Why would she do such a thing? I couldn't help but mutter those words. Sandy grinned and explained. My mom thought that if her son got seriously injured, he would come to see her. I got chills hearing Sandy's words. I never imagined that such a passionate feeling could exist in this world. Just thinking that I have the blood of such a woman gives me the creeps. Sandy smiled beautifully, as if reading my thoughts. Her intensity might be that unique aura possessed by those who have been through some real ordeals. Jake, can you please help guide Catherine? Sandy bowed deeply to me. Then, the front doorbell rang, and the door swung open. Sandy, I'm home. The one entering with a cheerful voice, calling out Sandy's name, was none other than Catherine. What, Mr. Smith, how do you do, I guess? Naturally, upon seeing me, Catherine exclaimed in surprise and acted a bit awkward. I didn't expect to be seen by Catherine either, so I was lost for words. Mr. Smith is here because he's concerned about your future and came to discuss it with me, your guardian. Sandy informed Catherine. Catherine responded with a somewhat suspicious "Is that so? I heard you wanted to go to law school. If you're undecided about which one, I can help." I addressed Catherine, who was standing. Her expression clouded slightly. "I'm sorry, I'll be honest. I've heard about your family situation from Sandy. I understand you want to live with your brother." Sandy, apparently not expecting me to bring it up directly, exclaimed, "Wait, Mr. Smith." I decided at that moment that I wanted to face Catherine sincerely, without any lies. "You sure have the audacity to barge in like that. Do teachers think they are so superior?" Catherine said sarcastically, her lips curling in disdain as she slammed her belongings on the floor in frustration. "Just because you've heard a thing or two doesn't mean you get to dictate what I do. Can you even imagine the life me and my brother have lived?" I was anxious, fearing that Catherine might start crying. However, her eyes didn't reveal any tears. All I could see was the bubbling rage. It wasn't anger directed at me. It was anger directed at something much bigger. Anger towards her parents, towards adults, the system, the world at large. It felt as if all these emotions were packed inside her. "I need to grow up fast. I have to." At Catherine's words, Sandy clasped her head in her hands. Perhaps Sandy once felt the same way. "That's not the point. Your current environment might be putting pressure on you, but there are people who genuinely care about you, like me, trying to help. You are protected, Catherine. You don't need to rush." I knew my words sounded cliché, but that's all I could come up with to convey my feelings to Catherine. "Did you ask Sandy about her burn, Mr. Smith?" "Yes," Sandy told me. "She has a severe burn scar from her side to below her chest." Upon hearing my words, Catherine quickly turned to look at Sandy. Sandy returned the look with a faint smile, her expression slightly complicated. "Catherine, what Mr. Smith said is true. I'm working on getting you to live with Jason now, so believe in me." Sandy tried to comfort Catherine gently. "If you study properly in college and gain some more knowledge, I believe you can help many more kids like us. We're counting on you, both Jason and I." At Sandy's words, Catherine nodded slightly. "And you're sure this is okay?" she asked in a trembling voice. "You're worried about the tuition fees and stuff. I do have a job, you know." Upon hearing a surprised voice from Sandy, Catherine also exclaimed, "What?" It seemed that Catherine had mistakenly thought Sandy was unemployed. "But you're always home," they exclaimed in surprise. Sandy's job is apparently translating philosophical books. She mostly works from home, so she seldom goes out. Jumping to conclusions as always, aren't you, Catherine? You need to be more observant. Sandy sighed in exasperation. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It seemed that having a good conversation could bridge any gap. If you don't talk, misunderstandings don't get cleared up, and you can't convey what you feel. "Sandy, I'm sorry. I promised it would be between us, but I broke that promise right away." Feeling guilty after laughing, I sincerely apologized to Sandy. She pondered for a moment, placing a finger on her chin, and then smirked. "Mr. Smith, how did you know the exact location of my burn? I don't recall sharing that specific detail." Sandy's eyes sparkled mischievously as she tilted her head and asked, Well, that's..." I was flustered, and Sandy grinned even wider. Catherine, her face turning beet red, covered her mouth and asked, "Wait, are you too?" I tried to deny it, but words failed me, fearing I might dig myself deeper. "You're going to take responsibility, right, Mr. Smith?" With a playful smile similar to the one she had when we first met, Sandy looked deep into my eyes. "I'll do my best." At my response, both Sandy and Catherine shared a laugh. And true to my word, 3 years later, I took responsibility and placed a ring on Sandy's finger. Meeting her was a stroke of fate, and I consider myself an incredibly lucky guy to have found the best partner in life.